I definitely did have BPD. I don't think I still do now.
Hey everyone, welcome to the BPD Bunch. I'm your host Xannie, and today I'm here with Mo, Madhurima, Céline, Carys, and Solène. Where in the world is everyone coming from today?
I'm from Central Ohio in the US.
I'm from Kolkata in India.
I'm coming from London, England.
I'm coming from Ontario, Canada.
And I'm joining from Kasab in Oman.
I'm coming from New Mexico in the United States. Today we're going to be talking about BPD recovery. If this or other BPD-related topics interest you, please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you do not miss anything. One of the most contentious topics online in the BPD spaces is the question, can BPD go away? What does recovery actually look like? So the first question is, how do you conceptualize BPD now compared to when you were first diagnosed? What changes have occurred in your understanding of the disorder?
For me, when I was younger and, I was just learning about BPD and what that means for me, I was just so angry at the world. And the way I dealt with that was, I have this and there's no hope for me. So I'm just going to do whatever I want and yell at whoever I want. And, oh, well, this is life. And, that can only last for so long before you're just like burnt out and you're suffering because you don't want to live like that. So for me now, I know how to manage my symptoms. I know how to have better relationships with people, and I know how to work through issues. And so now a lot of my BPD symptoms are like more internal. I still have to deal with intense moods and intense emotional reactions when something happens. So that's my biggest challenge now is less about the outside world and more about just dealing with my own emotions.
When I was prepping for the episode, it took me a while to actually go back and remember where my head was when I was first diagnosed and what my concept of BPD was, because it has changed so much over the years. And during that process of getting diagnosed with BPD, that's what started the discovery path that led me to figuring out that I'm autistic, and then being able to make accommodations for myself so that I don't end up having meltdowns as often, because I realized what looked like what was an autistic meltdown appeared like a BPD episode a lot of the times. And if I had had the right kind of coping mechanisms, maybe I wouldn't have had the BPD diagnosis, but also I wouldn't have had the dysregulation. So it's kind of like a chicken and an egg thing. So I feel like I definitely did have BPD. I don't think I still do now, but I still have some of the same struggles. I think, Mo, like what you were saying about how like it's more internalized. I have the same like turbulent thoughts. They just don't always come out.
When I was first diagnosed with BPD, I didn't know a lot about BPD. And so, my perception has changed so much from gaining knowledge. And I started reading up on it. One thing that really was difficult was to read that, there's still like commonly held belief that you can never recover from BPD, it's going to be with you your whole life. And I read that and I don't know, there was something within me that was like, I can't believe that. Because if I do, then I won't be able to invest in my own recovery. So I parked it. I was like, I'm not even going to go there. I'm just going to dive in and read up on all the stories of people who have been able to live with this in a way that is meaningful to them. And it's through that, and it's through community and like meeting people like everyone on this call that I started to feel like, okay, hang on a minute. There are people out there that have similar lived experience as mine. And, it means I'm not alone. And it means like other people really get me. And that was instrumental in like changing my perception. Now I don't feel like, I need to hide the fact that I have BPD, which was what I did for the first year. I didn't tell anybody apart from like my close family. Now I'm like, yeah, I have BPD. And do you want to know more about it? And that's through all the people, all the stories, and the community.
I was diagnosed 8 years ago with BPD. Well, I was diagnosed with EPD at the time, and then sort of discovered that it was the same thing through a lot of research, because again, I also wasn't given very much information upon diagnosis. And I would say I no longer view it as a life sentence, a disorder with no cure, and my entire identity, which I think I definitely felt when in the early days, or perhaps the first few years of my journey after being diagnosed. And I felt that it defined me because I felt so validated by seeing the symptoms written down and so many I related to. But I think maybe I stuck just too closely to the diagnosis because the label, perhaps because of the diagnostic criteria that I felt really explained and gave me a lot of relief to see it, sort of understand it more. And now it's not my whole identity. It doesn't define me. Something I still relate to, but something I would say that I was more unwell with in the past, and now something that's kind of part of me, but not all of me.
So when I got first diagnosed with BPD 5 years ago, at that time I was like so sick of dealing with myself. I remember feeling that I was done with tolerating all of my bullshit. I felt sick to my stomach of being who I was. So when I got that diagnosis, I immediately wanted to fix it. I told my therapist, like, what do I need to do? I need to like fix myself. And I remember being so desperate that in the first part of my healing journey, it was quite frustrating because I wanted to get better so much when I wouldn't. But like right here, like in the past 1 year or so, if I reflect back, I don't see myself as somebody who needs fixing or somebody who has something essentially wrong with them. I just think that, having BPD meant that I had some learned behaviors which I developed because of the trauma that I was passed on to as a child. And it's nobody's fault. I mean, it's definitely not something that I deliberately did to myself. And it did not make me a bad person, and certainly not somebody who was not worth being alive on this earth. So when I look back at myself with a lot of kindness, and I just think that yes, maybe how I behave and a lot of my behaviors are not healthy, but I'm here to learn better so that I can live a better life without hurting myself and others.
It's interesting to hear all of you talk because I can relate to a lot of the things. And honestly, I don't think I had much of a conception about BPD when I was first diagnosed because I had a hard time accepting that I was the one with the problem. I mean, I definitely went around and called myself crazy to people, or I would be like, oh, I'm so mentally ill, but it was really more like a way to shock them. In actual conflict situations, I usually believed that other people were the problem. I finally accepted even just having BPD after a breakup more than 10 years after I was diagnosed. And so I can really only compare my conception from now to then. And at that time, I couldn't really understand the difference between being emotionally sensitive and having emotion dysregulation. I thought that those two things were basically the same thing. And so I thought that BPD was just an inherent part of my identity that would never go away. But I now view those things as separate. So I can retain my emotional sensitivity without chronically struggling to regulate my emotions. And I think that's probably the biggest change in how I conceptualize it. Now we've kind of talked about the BPD aspect generally. How do you personally define recovery from BPD? What does it mean to you to recover from this diagnosis, and sort of what does that look like for you?
For me, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that if I were to be assessed by a psychiatrist now for the diagnosis, would I meet the 5 or more out of 9 diagnostic criteria? Probably not. And I think that's kind of my marker, I guess. There's a lot more to BPD, per person than just 9, bullet points. But I would say that's probably how I would define it. And then the sort of personal elements, so that I almost never have what I call BPD episodes or sort of crises. I don't reach that point anymore, so I don't necessarily need to engage my distress tolerance skills, because I'm able to use my skills to better regulate my emotions so that I don't get there, rather than when I was really unwell with it. I would say, it was like drama after drama, crisis after crisis, all the time. So now it's very rare, and that's kind of what functional recovery looks like for me.
Yeah, I did a similar thing where I just reviewed all the symptoms, and I'm like, I actually currently I experience maybe 2 of them chronically and 2 others periodically. And it's been that way. So there's probably like 4 symptoms that have come up as issues in my life in probably like a year and a half or more. I think that's the big thing, is going back just to check that baseline. And I think now, I guess it's the self-regulation part, so that I can prevent having those extreme reactions to big emotions, however those manifest in our lives. I feel like a lot of that, now that I have the tools that I didn't know before, growing up in a household that didn't understand the root cause of some of these big emotions, so that it's like you can treat a symptom, but it can be the wrong treatment, because the symptom is like the same for 5 different things, So it's like giving someone a Tylenol for their fever doesn't cure them of the infection, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for learning new tools and strategies that help with the everyday things, and so they don't become big.
I think it is so interesting to think about, because it kind of brings up the question of what is an average person and like what is a disordered person. And I personally tend to believe that the line between the two is actually pretty blurry. I think there are people, if they're on like far ends of the extremes, it's a little bit more obvious, but there's definitely this gray area. And the symptoms of BPD are not completely foreign to the average human experience. They're just dialed way up to the point that they cause psychological distress and dysfunction. So for me, I definitely don't think that my recovery means getting to a point where these things are not an issue at all, because as I've said in many episodes before this, I just don't even think I'd be a human at that point. So for me, I define recovery as 1, a reduction in symptoms to the point that it would not be worth calling them symptoms anymore. Like Céline said, if I walked into a psychiatrist's office today, and based on how I'm living my life now, they would not give me a diagnosis. And actually, my therapist removed BPD from my chart a couple years ago, so it's officially not a diagnosis that I'm currently struggling with. And 2, that I am able to realistically pursue things that are meaningful to me. I think that's one of the most important things, because I do think that I have had times where I wasn't very symptomatic because I was just avoiding the things that could be difficult, like relationships or jobs. And I am both experiencing a reduction in symptoms and able to do the things that are important to me.
Yeah, I can really relate to what's been said. The first thing that came to mind was going back to the criteria, and I actually did that at the end of the DBC program that I followed with my therapist, and that's when she said that, yeah, you no longer meet the criteria, like the minimum of 5. Beyond that is to know that I have more skills, tools, and options to navigate anything that might come up, like has been said as well. And the third thing that I would add that might be a little different, although it's linked to maybe what Xannie said just earlier, I can dream again. I can dream again. I have hope again. And a story around that was the last session I had with my DBT therapist after the year of DBT. She said, okay, let's review your goals that we set at the beginning of therapy. And I said to her, oh no, I'm sure it's going to be like positive, but there's one I know I haven't reached, and I'm going to be disappointed about that. And she said, what is that? And I was like, oh, well, it's my dream of becoming one day a presenter, a performer. Hasn't happened. And she looked down and she was like, that's not on here. That's not on here. So I hadn't set it as a goal, although it had been my dream my whole life and still is, and still working towards it. Because during that time of being so symptomatic, I completely lost any connection and ability to dream and to hope for things that I actually wanted in life. And that for me was a massive eye-opener. I was like, whoa, wow. And so now I can dream again.
A lot of people have said that they would no longer meet the criteria for BPD. And I don't know if that's true for me. I mean, my symptoms are definitely much more managed now compared to 20 years ago when I was diagnosed. But I still have internal struggles with my emotions, and, you know, I still jump to conclusions. I still think that people are out to intentionally hurt me. The only difference now compared to back then is how I react to that. So I can now challenge my negative beliefs about the world and how everyone else feels about me or thinks about me. I'm able to take a step back, and I'm able to realize that my thoughts are not facts. So my recovery is just being able to recognize that I might be having an emotional moment, but that's not the reality. Like, I'm able to have better relationships now because I'm able to hear other people's perspectives without feeling judged and criticized. And I can hear them, and I can acknowledge that there are some things that I might need to change in my life, and I can just go on and I can change and I can live my life and have good relationships.
For me, also, like everybody here already mentioned, like if I go back to the symptoms, I'm not really sure how many I will, like, take the box now. But I definitely know that I'm not fully symptom free because I still face like a lot of challenges, like if not chronically, like definitely when I get triggered. So the main focus of my recovery journey has been the small steps that I have taken towards, which are actually the big ones. For example, like fear of abandonment. If it gets triggered in me now, I wouldn't start slitting my wrists at the next instant. I would take a pause and I would use my skills. I would use the stop skill and I would use my crisis gate. And when I've calmed down, I can like use the wise mind skill to check the facts. And I have grown a lot in that aspect, so as to be in that place where I can self-soothe myself when a situation like that arises. And I have gotten better at creating boundaries and respecting other people's boundaries, and to know what works for me and what doesn't. So I don't know if I can say that I'm fully symptom free, but I've definitely come a long way than where I was 5 years ago. So it's the little things, and it means a lot to me. So I'm really proud of it.
You've done a great job. So on the topic of milestones, what is a major milestone that has marked your progress towards recovery? Tell us the story.
I think discovering that I'm neurodivergent and that like my brain structure actually is different, like to some degree, like it operates differently to some degree, and having grace for that and accepting that instead of fighting it is a huge milestone for me, because it was the fighting it that was causing my BPD symptoms in a lot of the cases. And I mean, some of them are just a part of being neurodivergent, like the rejection sensitivity, like that. I have a lot of that. That's probably still one of my biggest ones. But being able, like the major milestone for me is like seeing how simple things like living unmasked for the most part, ferociously protecting my sleep schedule, advocating for myself and my needs at work. Just all of these things that I've started to put into place now, seeing the result of that, the result being that I'm happier overall and that I have fewer problematic symptoms. And it's looking back at that, you don't really see the milestone. I guess it's not like a real one that you see it as you're approaching it. You only really see it as like in the distance after you've passed it. And you're like, wait, did that just happen? Did I just navigate that? Like, what? Yeah, I'm winning, you know?
For me, I would say a couple of years into my diagnosis journey, I came to faith, so I'm Christian, and I think whilst that it was a milestone, I was still struggling for a while, but it gave me at least the belief that I'm good enough for God, even when I didn't feel good enough for me, and that like there is grace and mercy for me, even when I don't feel it myself. So that was a really useful concept for me to feel personally. I kind of knew it theoretically, having grown up in church, but I didn't really believe it until that point. And then after that, I would say just stopping with the self-harm and realizing I wasn't suicidal anymore, which came, I would say, maybe a couple of years later. And that was a really big moment for me because I'd been suicidal for as long as I could remember since I was a kid. It was like a fantasy or an escape for me. It's kind of like, oh, that's always there if things get really bad or if I can't tolerate this pain or whatever it happens to be. And I realized one day that I just didn't want that. I didn't want that at all. And I found that really eye-opening for me because I never thought that I'd get to that place. So those were kind of my big milestones.
What she said. Thanks, Céline. I can so relate to that moment of realizing that you want to live. Like, but genuinely you do. Like, that is just huge. And that, for me, that started, I went on this retreat in India, and it was like a mental health BPD type retreat. And we would share a lot and talk through so much. But it was that moment I was in the ocean and the waves were huge, and I just kept getting like crushed by these waves. And I just felt overwhelmed with joy. I felt so alive, and I was like, oh my God, I get to live this moment. This is amazing. I want to live more moments like this. And even just today, I'm here in Oman for the weekend, and we went on this boat cruise and we saw dolphins. We saw dolphins. Stop it. Just in the wild like that, jumping around. A little baby that was, oh my God. Anyway, I got super excited. And that's it. And that's knowing that I am okay with navigating the really, really tough times, because they are amazing times that are worth staying alive for. And that even when my brain sometimes presses that big red button that says, well, we could just die, there is that other voice that goes, we don't want to do that anymore. We're good. We're happy to stay here for a bit longer and see what happens. And that, I did not think that would be possible.
So there isn't like one specific big moment when I realized I was like in functional recovery, but I would say I realized I was when I was able to accept criticism without becoming defensive and angry. And also when I was able to talk to a person when I was feeling angry or upset with them, I could talk to them calmly and I could tell them in a reasonable way, hey, I'm upset because of X, Y, and Z. And I could hear them respond. And it wasn't like this big, huge fight. It was just us communicating and resolving the issue, or, you know, compromising or whatever needed to happen. So that was when it clicked for me that things are better now and I have this under control. One of the moments that comes to mind when I think about being able to accept criticism and stuff was I was having a disagreement with a guy that I worked with, and we were close. I mean, we worked together, so we were friends, you know, and I don't even remember what we were arguing about, but I just remember that we both walked away like really mad at each other. And so we both went and did our own thing for a few hours. And instead of me losing my mind and cussing him out or telling him how shitty he is, we were able to approach each other a few hours later and just talk about it and say, hey, you know, like, this is how I feel about what happened. And nobody, like, there was no drama. And it was like, it was just mind boggling to me that I could hear him say, here's why I'm mad at you. And it wasn't like the end of the world for me. So normally disagreements always ended up being like a war, you know, and it wasn't. We said what we needed to say, we resolved it, and then we remained friends, you know.
As someone with BPD, like what I used to experience a lot was like splitting. I used to see the world entirely in black and white, and I used to think things are either all good or all bad, and there is absolutely no in between. So you can be a good person or a bad person. You cannot have two qualities within you. And as someone who has been growing up in a household where you were like, praised a lot for your academic achievements. So a lot of my self-worth was dependent on how good I did in school or how smart I was because I could do math, like stuff like that. So like I carried it around for a long time and I still do because a lot of my external validation comes from usually from professors who are telling me I'm academically doing good. So that's like something I used to struggle with. And something that happened recently was I appeared in an exam and I did not get the result I was hoping. And it was basically the residency exam, which I'm supposed to join in a few weeks. And I did not get the score I needed to get into to my dream branch. So I felt sad and I was heartbroken for like a day. And that day I could not think of anything else. I just wanted to lie down and cry. But the next day, I got up and I started to reevaluate my options. Like, what are the things that I can do? Now that this is out of the picture, what are my next options? And it just came very naturally to me. I began to formalize a plan. I thought, okay, this is not happening, so I can do this. I'll be good at this. And, this is not a very bad option for me. It'll, allow me to do like these specializations in the future. And I was doing fine, so I called up my boyfriend and I was talking to him and I said, I just realized I can do this. And he was like, oh my god, like that's like a very thorough research and I'm really glad you're able to do this like so soon. I mean, like, you're doing great. And that's when I looked back and I thought, oh my god, I don't think that I am worthless because I failed an exam. I actually feel good about myself. I'm looking at other options. Like, wow, did I actually get out of the loop? Like, did it actually happen? So yeah, this is a very recent one, like a few months back. And I look back to it to like feel good about myself because that was the first time for me.
I can super relate to what you said earlier about like the sort of going from not everything is in black and white anymore. But I really think the biggest standout for me is being able to maintain a relationship. I had never had very long lasting relationships before my husband. And part of that has to do with the fact that I was just young, but the two major adult relationships that I had before my husband, they didn't make it to 2 years. The first one ended explosively, and the second one, we just kind of existed next to each other, so there wasn't a whole lot of conflict, but we weren't really engaging enough to have conflict. And with my husband, in the beginning, things were really hard because I met him and started dating him basically the week I started DBT. And in the beginning of our relationship, when we would argue, I was so nasty. And sometimes it wasn't even arguments. It would be just disagreements. He wouldn't have the same opinion about something. And I always catastrophize, like, if he doesn't agree with me on this, then like he's going to eventually abandon me because we're not on the same page about absolutely everything. And now we've been together 7 years. And I can't remember exactly when this was. It's probably like 3 or 4 years ago. But we had a discussion about something that in the past I would have flipped out and not been able to tolerate even having the conversation, because I'd have been like, oh, you don't agree with me, like this is the end of the world. And it wasn't even emotionally intense. Like, we just had a discussion and didn't agree on the topic, and it wasn't a big deal. And I think that was a big moment, because it's just like everything used to be so intense. Even things that were meant to be mundane were intense. And getting to the point where the mundane things could just be mundane was such a revelation to me. I was like, oh, this doesn't have to be the end of the world. And, it's not like that all the time. But, being really happy with the fact that something could be mundane, I think was a huge milestone for me. Okay, so our last question. How has your self-identity evolved through your recovery process? Do you still identify with the label of BPD, or do you see yourself differently now?
I still identify with the label, although I've said I don't probably meet the diagnostic criteria anymore. I don't feel like I need to have it removed from my record. And I feel like it's part of me rather than my whole identity, which I used to feel. And I would say I probably use the label most often to help inform others. Still not as well known as I'd like it to be, but at least it communicates to other people that I feel like it sort of communicates. So when you get a box with a fragile label on it, or like a handle with care label on it, I kind of feel like when I say that, that's what I'm delivering to someone else, whether that be at work if I need adjustments, or I need people to recognize that I may have mood swings or be down one day at work, or whether it's to people like, a quick example is when I first met my boyfriend's parents, he'd already told them that I had it. And the first time I stayed there, we got into a little bit of a thing, and I just left in the night and I went to sleep in my car, but I wasn't really sleeping. I just went to have some space, and his parents saw the whole thing, and then he came out to come and get me, and I wouldn't let him in the car because I was locked in, and they'd get me, and then we came back in. And the fact that they knew about it meant it wasn't a big drama. They didn't come rushing and try and interfere or be like, what's wrong, what's going on? They just knew that I was having a moment, and then the moments passed. So yeah, I still use it, but I think it probably is more helpful to others than perhaps it is to me.
I don't consider BPD my entire identity. And really, there's nothing about me that is my entire identity, but it's still an important part of my identity, because having these emotions that I have affects my entire life. It affects my relationships, my friendships, all of it. Like even my perception of the world and the interactions that happen within that world of mine. So I'm no longer a victim to BPD, I guess, is like the way I think of it. Like I have control instead of my BPD. So it's not my entire identity, but it is an important part of myself. And I think it's important that the people close to me know about that, and just kind of go from there.
Quite similar to what's been said so far. I picture my identity as kind of like a puzzle, like imagine 500 pieces puzzle, and BPD is one of them. And at one point, it's the only one I could see. But now I can see the whole puzzle. That makes me. That's how I think about it. And in preparation for the episode, I was thinking, okay, well, what would it take for me to no longer feel like BPD is a part of that puzzle, is a part of me? And the answer actually was quite interesting even to me. And I thought it would be to have that deep conviction that I could never go back to rock bottom's basement. and revert to some of these problematic behaviors. Like, it would really be to believe that no matter what happens in my life, I would be able to navigate it without, having all of the symptoms kind of pop up again like it was before. And right now, I don't know, like, if or when that might happen. Maybe it won't. But I still feel wobbly around, like, thinking about some major, like, life events, problems, like major things that could happen in my life that may take me back to that place, because I've been there before. So the road exists. So until the road perhaps doesn't exist, or perhaps there's so many other alternative roads in that complicated brain up there. Maybe it's not that complicated. Okay, tangent, Solène, back on track. So I prefer to think right now that I live with dormant BPD. So I get to keep some kind of like a close, compassionate eye on it. And we can live together and kind of navigate, life to the best of our ability.
I'm really glad that you asked yourself that question, because my answer is kind of different, and I wasn't sure how I could articulate what it is that makes it different. And I think it's because I do have that conviction. For me, at my worst, I was very explosive. Like, a lot of the cliches that people say about BPD in terms of like being really manipulative and attention seeking and over the top in a really dysfunctional way, like, I was that person. And I'm not saying that no matter what happens in life that I could be stable, but like the level of venom that I used to spew at people, I just really cannot see myself ever being that person again for any reason. And I think that's why intellectually I don't identify with the label anymore. I will say part of that is probably because for me, I look at BPD as a reaction to not having managed and treated ADHD. And so I think there's a lot of overlap between the symptoms. And so there are certain things that I still struggle with, but the way I conceptualize it, it's like BPD was a reaction to not managing the ADHD. I found a way to deal with BPD, and now I can focus on the core issue, which is neurodivergence. And so there are days when I'm having big emotional reactions where sometimes I feel like, oh, this is BPD. But in my sort of like right, clear-headed state, I can see that that's just my neurodivergence, and that, I identify in the label BPD insofar as it connects me to this community and I can relate to a lot of these other experiences. But I really, truly believe I do not have BPD anymore. And I didn't when we started the show. That's been a recent change.
I agree, but like everyone, and it's the same for me. Like, while I believe that BPD is still a part of me, it's definitely not the entirety of who I am as a person. And like, I have a little analogy for this, which is that the way I see BPD right now is that, like, I have BPD is kind of analogous to I have a hyperactive immune system, so I'm allergic to a lot of things. So if I like have a physical problem, that is, I have a very hyperactive immune system. So whatever I eat, like be it nuts or like crab or seafood, or if there's pollen in the air, I get super triggered, and I get like hives all over my face, and like my eyes close up, my throat closes up, and it gets really bad till I get medical attention. So the only way for me to navigate through it is, if and until I get triggered, then I need to know what to do so that I can avoid the reactions that happen to it. And having BPD is kind of the same. So it's like I have identified what my triggers are. I mean, like most of them anyway, if there are nothing new. And I have the tools with me which help me regulate myself if I get triggered at all. So just because I have a faulty immune system does not mean who I am is a faulty immune system. I'm a person with a side of me that requires some extra attention, but that is not who I am. So that is how I see BPD. I mean, it's just my brain trying to protect itself, but sometimes it can get a little extra. But now we understand it and we don't judge it, but we help them like calm down and like be in the zone where it can help ourselves.
Xannie, my answer is very similar to yours. I see myself as a neurodivergent woman who has big emotions and lots of thoughts. And when I didn't understand where they were coming from, then I couldn't manage them. The unmanaged thought loops and the big emotions that I had, combined with my neurodivergent traits and the trauma that I experienced because of not knowing that I was neurodivergent for the majority of my life, that is what definitely caused the 8 symptoms that popped up when I was diagnosed with BPD. Now that that BPD diagnosis, then I had the ability to go through some treatments, and through those treatments, I was able to develop the skills I needed to even have my brain calm enough to discover that I'm neurodivergent. So if I turn my back on the BPD label like in entirety, then I feel like I'm denying what brought me to where I am. So I don't believe I have BPD, but I definitely still relate a lot to it. And I know people who still meet the diagnostic criteria, and I have a lot in common. So now I can live a life that's quiet enough to discover who I am, to develop that sense of identity. Like I'm remembering some of the things that like turned me on to life as a little kid, and they're the same things. So like, imagine that, like I'm still me, and it's okay to be me and to do those things and to like that stuff. I owe that part of myself that was so dysregulated for so long without knowing why. I owe her the like badge of honor of like having BPD, and now being where I am today, it's like, yeah, that's like, I still identify with that for sure.
Thank you, everyone, so much for watching Season 5 of the BPD Bunch. We hope that you got lots of nuggets of wisdom to take with you on your journey. Friday, we'll be back to talk about some of the challenges we still face that make us question whether we still have BPD. Sunday, we've got a fun brunch episode coming out, and that is it for the season. In between this and next season, we do have some little extras, our BPD bites. So we do have content coming in between. Please consider supporting us on Patreon, and we will see you again in the spring of 2025. You can follow us on Instagram or check out our community feed on YouTube for updates, and we will see you next time.